All right. Welcome back to the Athletic Health Podcast. Today, special guest. We are welcoming in Jenny Martin, the Chief Nursing Officer of RecoveryPlus. For those of you who are watching via video, you're seeing it right. We do have matching T-shirts on. I first met Jenny a few months back when I was getting my own testing done, and she opened my world to stuff that I had never really experienced or experimented with or tried before. I'm going to do my best to stay out of the way in this episode and let her just dump all of her knowledge onto the people listening. So, Jenny, thank you very much for being a part of this. Thank you for carving out some time in your day. Let's start. Tell the folks who you are, what you do. And I think most importantly, I'm really curious about this, just for the people listening. When I got tested with, at RecoveryPlus with Jenny spent 45 minutes to an hour with me on Zoom explaining my testing to me, which I thought was remarkable. And every person I've referred to RecoveryPlus since, that's my sales pitch. And there were a few things that she said in there that made me be like, okay, she's not just going to the 9 to 5 here. She cares. And I think most importantly, out of all of the who you are, what you do, I'm curious why you care so much.
Yeah, awesome. And thank you so much for having me today. I'm very excited. So kind of a little bit of background. My first degree right out of high school was exercise physiology and exercise sciences. So when I graduated high school and was going to college, my passion from day one was cardiac health. I wanted to do cardiac rehab. I wanted to change the way that people exercise and prevent cardiac disease. So kind of the passion, I guess you could say, comes from the fact that I have had a family member who was affected at a very young age from heart disease. So she actually had a heart transplant and had to, go through years of just kind of not optimal health, and at the age of 13. And so, yeah, I think that's probably where I think that's where the passion started. Now, has the passion grown and developed into something much bigger since then? Absolutely. But at the core, my first passion was making sure that we are preventing heart disease from the get-go, and then being able to provide better rehab and more accessible rehab. So that's kind of where my passion came from. That's why I linked up with RecoveryPlus. I say linked up. I mean, honestly, the company started about 8 years ago, and I've been here since day one. So very passionate about what we do. We continue to grow and branch out. And we just have so much learning to do and so much growing to do. And the way that we used to think, it's just so different from the reality of what exercise and being an athlete is today. And I want to really close that gap.
Yeah, my thoughts on athletes, and so what I'm branding in my own world is this athletic health, and I think what that signifies to me in our context is not shooting for normative values, and you mentioned this a few times on our call, on our results call, where it was like, oh, like this is you're like technically you're good here, but we want to shoot for a little bit higher. For reasons X, Y, or Z. And to me, I'm like, when I think of an athlete, and I think, I'm not sure if it was on this call with you or it was with the people who do my blood work, where I'm like, look, I want to be, I don't want the middle ground here. I want top 1% here. I want elite level. I think I always describe it as I want to be a machine here. So we've got to get the top level here. So when you look at anybody's sheets coming back from RecoveryPlus or whatever you're looking at, are you sharing that? Are you seeing? I mean, you have to be seeing that, right? You're seeing pushing into those higher categories is is more effective than just kind of shooting for the normal?
Yeah, absolutely. And that is something that's a great point, actually, because oftentimes when we get test results back, whether that be from cardiopulmonary exercise testing, VO2 max testing, or blood work, right? We have what is considered normal. And normal is a concept based on what everyone else, that's your age, your sex, your height, your weight, your demographics, right? That's normal. And so basically, so long as you fit into that box, then you're fine. And that's a very, very limited way of seeing your health. And in reality, it's semi inaccurate, right? Because if you're looking to be optimal versus normal, then you have to look to find ways to optimize what you are working with. So a lot of times we'll see people come in and their test results will say everything was normal, but they still don't feel like they're achieving maybe their max potential. So I think with what we do with this test specifically is we look to close that gap between what is considered normal and what is optimal. Because everybody's body is different, it functions different, the needs that we have are different. And so really focusing on closing that gap and looking at what do you want to do, what are you currently able to do, and what do you feel like your limitations are, and then looking at the test data to say, okay, this is where we can work to improve, and really pinpointing the areas. But yeah, you're right. It's like, well, you're normal. Well, I don't want to be normal. I want to be great.
Yeah.
I want to be better.
I think anybody, and you must see this, the people that are like at least voluntarily going to your clinic are, I mean, if you know what a VO2 max score is, if you're concerned about your anaerobic threshold and you are not an exercise physiologist, for you to know that you've traveled down some paths where you are attempting to optimize. Is that fair to say on the demographic?
Yeah, absolutely. So they at least know that something was off. They've done their own research, and then they want to get some answers is usually when they come in. Or they feel great, but they want to shave 10 seconds off of their marathon time, or they want to, whatever. Maybe they're training for a bigger event. And that's usually the ones that come in.
So I know I've had the discussion with you and Ashley, and like I know who you guys want to come in there, and truly this is for anybody, any of our listeners who has a heart. This is for you. But I'm curious to know who's the target demo? Like when you narrow it down, who's the people that are coming in who are benefiting the most? Because, in my world, I'm sure you see it, right? A physician refers you to me and it's like, okay, what's this guy's deal? Go through the process. I can't wait to be done with this. Whereas somebody coming in on their own volition is obviously way more motivated. Who is the person who is like the perfect client here?
Oh, wow. The perfect client. All right. Well, so to be very honest, we have a very wide range of people that come in. So when you have people who have already had a heart event, maybe they've had a heart attack or they've had stents, they're very motivated to figure out how to not have one again. And what we're looking at is we're actually looking at what zone of heart rate can you safely and most effectively increase your cardiac function. Now, I say that to also say the other end of this spectrum is that we have people coming in who are data driven. They're watching their heart rate. They know their numbers. They know their pace. They know their cycle speed and distance. They're very data driven. And those people take this data and they run with it. And I've actually seen in 3 months' time, which is very short, somebody that had what we call cardiac dysfunction or an inducible threshold go from having one to completely reversing that cardiac dysfunction pattern in 3 months. So, when you say who's the perfect person to come in, you said it kind of best, which is if you have a heart and you have lungs, and you want to move, because walking, running, cycling, rowing, we can get better at it all. And I think that everybody has a reason and a drive, and it looks different on everybody. I mean, your drive to the next person's, to mine, it's all different. And I think, that would be my.
I've got this theory, and I've seen it play out in my clinic, so my tagline is athletes heal faster, right? And
Yes.
like, I think about the professional athlete. I got this picture here right next to my desk here of the team photo of the Lakers when I was working there. And like, I look at those guys and I'm like, I'm realizing how hard it is to actually get them to improve, right? So like Brandon Ingram, 6'9", jumps 42 inches in the air, got a 7'4" wingspan. Like, to get somebody like that who's already at the upper limits of human capacity to jump from 42 to 43 inches, you're moving mountains. And what I relay to, what I get a lot is they're like, I'm not an athlete. And they don't like have any internal connection to the picture of what an athlete is. And I'm like, yeah, I got that. But like, if you don't have Brandon Ingram's hamstrings, if you don't have his obliques, we talk low hanging fruit. We got a watermelon hanging from the tree down to the ground here. Like, it's just, you talk about this person or the people that come in and they make sweeping changes, monster change, completely reversing it in 90 days. I feel the same way about, like, look, if you don't have a hamstring, stop. End of story. Don't talk about your visual system or your teeth, or the left lateral pterygoid inside of your mandible. Like, get a hamstring and watch magic happen. Are you seeing the same thing occur with this kind of low hanging fruit of just like, hey, let's just do the simple stuff. Don't worry about the complex stuff. Don't worry about your VO2 max. Like, do this thing. And I guess this is like the rules of the universe, right? The simple things done repeatedly ultimately work. Are you seeing this?
Yes, absolutely. So, and I think that is, first of all, aren't we all? I mean, we all can be an athlete. Now, are we going to be the Lakers player, I'm going to say LeBron, right? Are we going to be the LeBron? No, we're not. But like, could we potentially? So, I mean, and yes, athletes do heal faster. You want to know why they heal faster, though? So when we look at results, so we look at peak VO2, which is like the amount of oxygen uptake, right? When we can increase that number by 10%, which is a very achievable goal if you are following the plan, right, in 3 months, we can increase it by 10%. That is a 17% decrease in all-cause mortality. So you're right. Yes. Is the athletes heal faster? Yes. Why do they heal faster? Because they have a higher peak VO2. They have a higher VO2 max. They have a higher AT. They have all of these things that are higher with our athletes. The reason that they heal faster is because these numbers are higher, right? Now, everybody, I have not met a single person in my years of doing this that couldn't get better. I don't care at what level. I don't care what level you're at. You could be at the top of your game, at the top of the height of your career, max everything. And if you tweak things, if you continue to improve your training with proper data, you're still going to get better.
Yeah. I think I would say maybe my like hidden reason for pushing people towards the world of athletics and competition is because it's an obvious motivation. And at the end of the day, you've got to be super motivated to do this. And I want to jump slightly back to where you were discussing the people who have already had the cardiac events.
Sure.
And the people who are in pain, right? And it's I call that like a teachable moment. How much does that play into somebody's progress in this world, like their internal motivation? This is an obvious answer, but I want to hear it from you. How much does does that internal drive and those teachable moments play? What have you seen in that, like along that journey?
Yeah. I mean, I think it's 100%, right? Because I could want the world for somebody, and it doesn't matter if they don't want it, because I'm not the one putting in the work for them. And so if they don't have that internal drive, whatever it is, and I think that one of the really cool things about this is you can the testing is reproducible, and you do serial testing, right? So in reality, even if you're not competing in like a sport, a game, you are essentially competing against yourself to improve your own potential. So um, everybody, anybody that says they're not competitive, we all are, and at something, you know. And sometimes we compete against ourselves. Sometimes we need the drive of others. Sometimes we just need the numbers to tell us how we're doing. But in reality, we're all competitive. We all have that in us. And so when they can see it instead of just feel it, sometimes I think that is what really kind of makes the difference, right? So and it's like anybody, it's like a weight loss journey, right? You know, it's like until somebody else says, hey, look, this is what I see, sometimes it gets a little defeating, right? So with this, people that sometimes don't have the same drive or the same motivation intrinsically, we can say, look, your peak VO2 went from X to Y, and this is what this data means. And so giving them that information allows them to kind of intrinsically then be motivated when they're seeing even small differences and small changes and improvement amongst themselves. Like they see their old self to the new self, and it doesn't matter really where they are. They could have had a heart attack. They could have just been somebody that wants to get into exercising, or they could be at the top of their game.
A progressive realization of a worthy ideal. I think that is the only time that the human brain shuts the hell up. I think it is always going a million miles away, and it's always unsatisfied until you feel like you are making legitimate and satisfactory progress towards a worthy goal that you are attempting to attain. Yes. Said it very well. Okay, I want to talk about testing. Let's talk about what you're testing, how you're testing. And so why don't you start there and explain to us the testing process?
Sure. So what we do is what we call CPET testing, or cardiopulmonary exercise testing. So common misuse of words, right, is VO2 max and peak VO2. And if you have been in the industry at all, you know, you've heard the word VO2 max. I think peak VO2 is maybe a little newer in the sense of understanding there's a difference, right? So to kind of start out, I want to be very kind of transparent with what we look at. We actually look at peak VO2, and they aren't interchangeable. So VO2 max is the muscle's max capacity to metabolize oxygen, right? That's VO2 max. Peak VO2 is actually your heart's ability to get the oxygen to the muscles to be utilized or metabolized. So I think that is something I really want to point out, because I think so many times we use these words, oh yeah, my VO2 max or my peak VO2 or well, what does that even mean? And what are we looking at, right? Because a lot of times we'll have people come in, they're like, well, I already know my VO2 max. And I'm like, great, that's not the same thing. That's just the actual max capacity of your muscles that they could metabolize oxygen. But how do we know how much they're getting? Those two numbers could be vastly different. So that's kind of one of the big things that we look at. I say big, we look at a lot of different data points, but that's number one, right? Now, how do we do that? So we have three components to our test. We have spirometry, which is looking at the lung function and the gas exchange. We have an EKG, which is looking at the electrical part of your heart. And then we have the exercise stress test, right? Which is essentially looking at all of these components together. I think one thing that is also probably unique, and I don't want to say that other tests don't do this, because some tests do, some tests take different parts of it. Specifically, though, as we look at the EKG data, which is looking at the electrical changes, we look at the gas analysis, which is where that mask comes into play, where we're looking at the spirometry, CO2 versus O2. And together, when we look at all of this, it's about 400% more accurate than if we were to just look at gas exchange or just look at the EKG. So if you go into your doctor's office, they're just going to do an EKG stress test. A lot of times the VO2 max testing that will get done is only looking at the gas exchange with the mask. So really putting those together is going to get you about 400% more accuracy with your numbers, your specific numbers. From there, you get on a bike. A lot of times people will ask, why do we use a bike versus a treadmill? Because, you know, runners are like, well, I run, I don't bike. That I understand it. And we have a conversion for that. But honestly, the reason why is a couple of reasons, really. It's more reproducible when we are looking at this on a bike. And it also allows people who maybe a lot of runners don't run on a treadmill. They run outside. And that is a very different experience. It alters your gait. It alters your speed. So we're not really looking at a true data comparison from running outside to running on the treadmill. Now, some runners do both, and you know that works well for them. But we also, you know, people have orthopedic injuries that sometimes a treadmill would impede their results. It would decrease the accuracy of the test. So when we put people on a bicycle, we actually can customize their ramp. We can reproduce the test. So basically, when we do serial testing, it's more accurate data. It keeps this, it aligns much better than if we were to put them on a treadmill. The EKG is cleaner. There's less artifact. So there's several reasons why we use a bicycle over a treadmill. And then basically we have you take off, right? So you take off, you do some unloaded cycling, and then your customized ramp will start to kick in at about 6 minutes in. From there, it'll increase in intensity. You go to max. We're monitoring your blood pressure response. We're looking at your EKG rhythm. And we're also watching what we call the respiratory exchange ratio, which is a really good indicator of when your body has really reached max effort, right? Because sometimes we have people who will stop before, sometimes they push themselves maybe a little too far. So anyways, this gives us this ratio, this RER, or the R, that exchange ratio gives us a really good idea of where you are in more than just a subjective, but an objective data point of your max, if you've reached your max.
Can you explain the RER a little bit to myself and the audience here of like what exactly, like why is that a good indication?
Yeah, that's a great question. So we're looking at the VO2 and the VCO2 ratio, which is basically oxygen uptake to carbon dioxide output. So CO2 output, right? So we're looking at that gas exchange. And once that gas exchange gets over what we, in a lot of times in athletes, it's just going to get around 1, like 1.0, 1.01. And that's okay because they are essentially more cardiorespiratory fit right? So that number getting higher, that exchange ratio being higher, is really hard to achieve. But anything over 1 is considered acceptable, and it actually says the data is valid. But our goal is to get you to like 1.06, 1.09, right? So when we're looking at that, that's where we want to get you. Now, the reason that we do that is because we want to know about your anaerobic threshold, right? So anaerobic threshold is another really popular thing to look at. When the lactic acid is starting to spill over into the blood, that's when we start to get that like burn. Pretty much past anaerobic threshold, it would be very hard to do that, sustain that level of intensity for more than usually around like 5 minutes would be kind of as far as you could push it. Five minutes would be a lot. So with that number, we're able to make sure that we've reached all the data points that we need to get to. We need to know what your anaerobic.
So so the RER and the anaerobic threshold, they're correlating, right? That's what you're saying? Okay.
Yeah,
so
essentially.
Okay. And so as I understand it, the anaerobic threshold is roughly, it's not like a definitive line, but it's when you shift from the aerobic energy system as your primary energy development system or energy production system, and now you're becoming predominantly anaerobic. So, 2024 here, Paris Olympics coming up, think sprinters versus marathoners, okay? We've got the sprinter is going to be I don't know, Noah Lyles. That's the guy, right?
Yeah.
He's the sprinter coming up here for US 100-meter dash. Going to be around 9 seconds there. The Usain Bolt time. You're not going to be able to push that much longer, right? Because that's going to be the anaerobic threshold or the anaerobic system pretty much exclusively. It's going to be heavy skew in that direction, whereas the marathon is heavy skew in the other direction. Then every distance in between is going to crank those dials one way or the other. The anaerobic system can only produce energy for a short period of time. So think evolutionarily, trying to run away from a lion. And you've just got to have this quick burst, but you can't have that quick burst forever. I can't sprint a marathon because you're just going to run out of gas. So I like this, right? Of the RER, we're looking at the say it again. What's the target here of the RER? We're trying to find the max. No, not the number, but like the max. What's if I'm a third grader, which I am here. What am I measuring?
We're measuring how much oxygen is coming into the system versus how much CO2 is coming out of the system. So think about it this way. I always find like a picture is easier than words, right? For me. So I look at it, what does anaerobic threshold look like? Well, anaerobic threshold is when we start to unload or we increase expiration because we're trying to push off that CO2 that is causing us to get tight and burn, right? So it's funny too, because I've done this test a lot, right?
Yeah,
for training purposes, for like training other people, and also just because I like numbers. And so if I'm in the city, like I'm getting a test, even if it's been a month. So I've done it so much now, I can tell you when I hit anaerobic threshold within seconds. I can say.
Now, is it because of your respiration?
It's because of my respiration and how my legs feel. So I can start to feel the change that is happening, right? So I know my heart rate. I can watch my heart rate and I'll say, mark it. And I'm within 2 beats and within like 3 to 5 seconds of when I hit my anaerobic threshold, because you can feel it. You can feel when you're starting to breathe heavier and quicker. You're puffing off that oxygen, and you can start to feel that kind of that lactic acid, right, build up, or the burn. If people aren't athletes, they don't always know what lactic acid in the muscles feels like. So you have to be able to describe that to them, right? So it's that burn in the legs. That's not a bad thing. That's just lactic acid building up. It's actually not a bad thing to reach that. But being able to know when you do, because our goal is to increase the heart rate at which you're hitting anaerobic threshold. When we have a stronger pump, we have a higher stroke volume. That means then we will actually go into anaerobic threshold at a later point in exercise, which means we can go further, we can go faster. even your sprinters would benefit from pushing their anaerobic threshold out from a heart rate standpoint, even though they're 9 seconds, right?
Mhm. So is it fair to say that when you start crossing the threshold, the anaerobic threshold, I've always thought of it as like you're starting to run a deficit here, and you're going to run out of gas. Whereas if you can be highly aerobic, you're humming, right? Because as you and I sit here on this podcast, we are smoking out the aerobic system. But if we started jogging or sprinting in place, we're going to start gassing out quickly, which will skew anaerobic. So is it fair to say the more anaerobic you go, or the closer you get to that threshold, I guess the threshold is when you're really starting to use it. That's when you start running a deficit and the tank is starting to empty, as opposed to like keeping up with the demands of whatever you're doing.
Yeah. Because your oxygen intake is no longer adequate. So how long can you go without oxygen, basically, in an oxygen deficit, right? Because that's what you don't have enough oxygen going into the muscles. Therefore, you're going to start building up CO2. It spills over. That's when you get that burn. And so, you're just in a deficit of energy, ATP. You're depleting everything. That's what you need to continue.
Right. And okay, so from a testing perspective, obviously anaerobic threshold is a great metric to wrap your head around, because that will indicate the level of intensity that your body is, can we call it, comfortably able to produce. And then once it becomes uncomfortable, it crosses that threshold, right? So like a low anaerobic threshold would indicate somebody who's not necessarily able to operate at a certain level of intensity. Whereas we watched the Tour de France, and what's the guy's name? Teddy Pogacar. That guy's able to pump it out like crazy, right? Like his anaerobic threshold, the intensity that he's able to comfortably and break even at is going to be significantly higher than, unfortunately to say, than mine. Is that fair to say? Is it fair to say that Teddy Pogacar is in better shape than me?
Let's say he's in different shape, right?
Okay, fair. I would kick his ass if he was here.
Yeah. So I think the thing is, and I think that maybe you and I talked about this before, is the importance of versatility in your training as well. Because so if somebody is really good at running a marathon, I say this, I would not be able to, but somebody else that was an average runner, right, could probably beat them in a sprint.
Yeah.
So that's why I think, like, from a runner's perspective, this is why it's so important not to just focus on only long runs, right? You want to do speed work, and you want to do rowing, and you want to do cycling, and you want to do swimming, and you want to do all of these things, because when we look at the system as a whole, and specifically anaerobic threshold, right? If you only train for one thing over and over and over and over and over, you're going to get really good at that one thing. But there's going to be a lot of other things that, like, you would be able to beat a Tour de France athlete in, right? Because probably,
damn right.
Yeah. Because probably your versatility in training is much different.
Yeah. Okay. So what I want to ask, just circle back to VO2, peak VO2. I love that. So I think VO2 Max, got to shout out Peter Attia for, I think he was the one who popularized VO2 Max and getting everybody excited about testing it, which, God bless, it's awesome. It makes sense to me that the peak VO2 makes a little bit more sense. And I spoke with an exercise physiologist on the podcast. I think it'll be a week prior to when this one will release. And he was talking about how it's a product of involved muscle mass. And like, that's the difference between using the bike versus using the treadmill. But to me, okay, like whatever, like we certainly want the right muscles involved here, especially if I am a Tour de France rider, and I want those muscles being predominant here. But from a cardiovascular perspective, it makes more sense to look at the peak VO2. Now, does that differ? Are you still getting this? If I did a treadmill test, do I get the same read on a peak VO2 as I would on a bike test?
So no, you don't. But we actually do a calculation on our test to convert that to treadmill or running. So if you are a runner or you are somebody that runs on the treadmill or versus outside, whichever, it's going to actually show you your peak VO2 based on that.
Why wouldn't that be the same?
So it's because of the muscle, right, that you're using versus sitting on a bike. So we go ahead and account that into the equation when we look at your peak VO2 for you're utilizing more muscle versus not utilizing more muscle.
So if we're being a dummy about it and say for running, I'm going to have to use arms, way more hamstring. I'm going to have to really get a lot involved here. So the oxygen demand's going to be way higher, I'm putting the piece together here. That to me would give us a different reading as opposed because the heart's just going to be doing a different. That's why the zone 2 for walking, jogging, treadmill, running is going to be different than a zone 2. Look at us putting pieces together here.
Right?
Putting pieces, so it's different than the zone 2 for biking. I'm on the money here?
Yes, correct. Yeah, it is. And I want to kind of point out too that so I think when we look at the two numbers, VO2 max versus peak VO2, I don't think I can say that one is more important than the other, but they are different. So when people come to me and they ask, well, which test is better? There isn't a better test, right? Because you're looking at two different things. So how can one be better than the other when really you're just looking at two different numbers? And can you utilize them together? Sure. You're looking at the max capacity of your muscles versus how much oxygen you're actually getting to your muscles. So I think they actually complement one another very well in reality, right? Because, okay, great. My muscles can have this much max capacity. Great. But how much is actually getting there? I don't know if I don't get my peak VO2.
Right. So I think that goes back to what you said earlier of it being 400% more accurate to use these tests together. Right. And I think that is the beauty of this is what I've always thought about athletes is if I have a shoulder problem and I go to a physical therapist, I'm going to get shoulder exercises. Whereas if an athlete, if an NBA player gets hurt, well, they're going to go through everything, right? They're going to go through shoulder, core, legs, neurological recovery. They're going to go through each aspect of it. And I think that's a huge component, a huge driver as to why they're healing faster. So it's VO2 max, awesome. It's a problem, maybe not a problem, but you don't get your 400% boost of accuracy if I'm looking at that measurement in isolation. I get the accuracy when I bring everything together. Fair?
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. Because you're also, I don't want to speak for every VO2 max test because that isn't fair either. So when we're looking at our test data, we're looking at peak VO2, we're looking at stroke volume, we're looking at anaerobic threshold, we're also looking at your lung function, we're also looking at, if you have an inducible threshold or not. So is there a potential? And I think that's one of the things, and again, full transparency, right? Ours is a medical grade exercise test because we want to be able to detect early stages of cardiovascular disease because we know that 80% of it is reversible. So why wait until you have something wrong? Why don't we start training now to improve cardiovascular function to prevent that ever being an issue down the road? So it's 400% more accurate when you look at EKG and gas analysis together versus one or the other, specifically in improving your exercise capacity and detecting early stage cardiovascular disease. So it's kind of a two-part test, right? It's not just improving cardiovascular or exercise capacity, but also looking at, is there potentially microvascular disease or small vessel disease? If there is, What can that be caused by? Can we reverse it? Is it genetics? Is it inflammation? What is it? And so we have the ability to look at that a little deeper when we're looking at peak VO2, because now we can see, is there something causing you to not be able to cross over that little threshold that you have as like a performance athlete? Is that what is keeping you from getting 10 seconds faster on your marathon time?
Okay, so I know people are going to ask this. I know I've asked this, and the first question I want you to answer is this a top 5 question that you get asked on a regular basis? And then give me your response. What about smartwatches and the data and the Oura rings and the Whoop bands? What's your take there?
Yeah, that is definitely top 2 questions.
Wow, I was gonna say top. I was gonna say top 3, but I was leaving some room for error.
Yeah. Okay. So I use a smartwatch. I do. I think that they are they're accurate when it comes to tracking your heart rate. Are they accurate when they are tracking your VO2 max? Because they all tell you your VO2 max. They all give you your heart rate zones, right? Yeah. And the answer to that is tricky.
As expected.
So I would say in general, the actual heart rate monitor is it accurate and telling you what your current heart rate is? That is correct. What I like about several of them, I think Whoop and Garmin, and I know Apple, you can actually input your zone 2 heart rates, which I love. Right? Great. I'm glad they did that. Yes. I know you can with Apple. I want to say Whoop you can, and I believe you can with Garmin, from the people that I've kind of talked to that use those products. So wonderful, because are they accurate in giving you your heart rate zones? Now, this is not coming from my opinion so much as it is just coming from people that I have worked with, that have done the tests, that utilize them, that will tell me that their heart rate zones are not where our test is showing them to be at the time, because they have something underlying. They have like inducible thresholds, right? Which is that cardiovascular or endothelial dysfunction. So oftentimes, and every one of them is a little different. So for example, my Apple Watch tells me that my heart rate zones for zone 2 are a little higher than what they really are. And what they can't take into consideration is the gas exchange. All they can use is your age, your sex, your height, your weight. And then they can use what you put in is your activity level. So you can say, like, I work out 5 to 6 times a week at a moderate to whatever, right? At moderate intensity, or I do 60 minutes 5 times a week and I am a vigorous exerciser. And so they use that data along with your age, your sex, your height, your weight to then calculate using an algorithm, right? To say, oh yeah, this is your heart rate zone, and it would be everybody else's heart rate zone that fit what you look like.
Are they using like heart rate data from I just assumed that they're using heart rate data from my workouts.
No. Well, and they aren't, because some of them I think can start to incorporate that some. But if you think about it, if you go out and you buy a Whoop, right, or you buy an Apple Watch, and you start looking at that, they don't have any data to use that off of. They're just using what you've put in. They don't have that.
Will they give you a VO2? So my Oura ring is they gave me like an estimated VO2 Max. And then they had me take a walking test. How far can I walk in 6 minutes? And Jenny, you should have seen me walking along the Hudson River trying to cover distance in 6 minutes. Anybody who saw me for those 6 minutes thought I was about to experience a bathroom emergency.
That's pretty awesome. Yeah. So yeah, they can use that data, but they still don't have the gas exchange, no matter what. No matter if so let's say that they use your heart rate data, which would be really, that would be more data that would be personalized, but it still doesn't mean that it's okay, right? Because a lot of people, for zone 2 specific, are over training. So they're training at a higher rate than what they should be training at to be in true zone 2. And so, and I keep kind of going back to this, that inducible threshold, or that where that point of, let's call it compensation is what it is, right? One system isn't doing what it should be doing, so another one compensates, which causes this inducible threshold, right? If you're exercising, say for, let's say you're doing 60-minute to 90-minute workouts because you're full training mode, right? And you're doing that 6-7 days a week, and you're above zone 2, and you never get in zone 2 because you think you are, but really for you personally, based on your system, you're above it. It actually, from a cardiovascular and respiratory standpoint, is doing you very little benefit. I would even sometimes say potentially doing more harm than it is good if you do not get into that zone 2 from a cardiovascular benefit standpoint, right? We're looking at the cardiovascular benefits. If you are not actually in zone 2, then you're not getting the cardiovascular benefits from being above for an extended period of time. Now, can you go hit train, right? And you can go zone 3, zone 4, then back to zone 2? Sure. Yeah, that's great, actually. But prolonged, sustained exercise above zone 2, you're really not getting the cardiovascular benefits that you think you are.
Oh, yeah, that's a can of worms for sure. Okay, so I'd like to. I'm going to do my best here to create some sort of like, put the testing into as nice of a box as we can for people listening. Like, what can you do? Like, obviously, I think we all understand that the Apple Watches and the smart technology. I mean, we got an estimation here, right? They're taking a best guess. Is it accurate? Maybe a little bit, but obviously getting it tested in a lab is always going to be better. I love the emphasis on integrating everything together. That just makes the most sense. And I think like looking at all the numbers at the end of the day, like even as I was like approaching the question with you of like, what do you think of Apple Watches? Like, even if it's like, okay, if my VO2 Max is a 50, now what? Like, what do I do with that? And Apple Watch has
what does that even mean?
Data. Yeah, they have a ton of data in that little dashboard that they create. So, I think for me, hearing you speak and having gone through the process, the integration aspect of the testing is what makes this really valuable, as opposed to just isolated metrics that are less than helpful in isolation. So from a testing perspective, like you've got to go somewhere. You've got to go somewhere and get that test. Let's talk like actions after people get tested. Let's start here. What are the most common things? When people come to my clinic, almost nobody walks out of there without me saying, you need stronger hamstrings, you need stronger abs. Like it's pretty much across the board. What are the things you're seeing?
So what the things that we're seeing is people that appear to be in prime condition will have something. One of the systems isn't where we want it to be. Doesn't mean that it's not normal. It's just not optimal. And we actually have the ability to see what optimal would be for this person's body needs based on some pre-data, like pre-testing. It actually gives you a trajectory, or it like customizes your specific need, right? It gives you a chart. So I would say that we see that no matter how high the peak VO2 is, that there is still room for improvement, whether that be stroke volume or anaerobic threshold. I would say, I hate to give a percent here, but I'm going to probably say 60%, maybe it's a little bit more, but let's say 60% of people are more heart rate dependent than stroke volume dependent.
Can you touch that? Because that was me, and the people that I've sent to you have come back with the same thing, and I found this to be the most captivating part of the testing. And for the people that are going to watch, I'll throw my graph up there. Would it be helpful for me to pull it up now, Jenny, so you can see it as you talk?
Sure. Yeah,
Okay.
yeah, that'd be great.
Is it going to be? Got to figure this out here. All right. Let me know. Can you see it here?
Yes, I can. All right. So can you zoom in a little bit on the panel 2 graph?
Actually, let me do it this way. I have a better picture.
Okay.
Boom.
Oh, hold on. It didn't change.
Oh, no. Can you see?
I can still see the 2 screens.
Okay.
Oh.
Infinity mirror, dismiss. I know we're dealing with some technical side. Are you able to see this?
I can see, yes. Can you scroll up some?
This is just an isolated picture here.
Okay. All right. So go back maybe to the last one because it was a little bit better on the panel, but while you're doing that, I'll talk about stroke volume and what stroke volume is, because I think that understanding what stroke volume is really important when we're talking about heart rate. Heart rate, everybody knows, right? We just know what heart rate is. Stroke volume, though, is actually the force of the contraction of the left ventricle. So it's essentially what's pushing the blood out. So when we're exercising, one of 2 things happens is we either have a faster or quicker heartbeat, which is increase in heart rate, or we will have a harder contraction. Well, when we're exercising, efficiency-wise, it is better to have a stronger contraction or a higher stroke volume than heart rate. And what we'll see is we have, when we're looking at our graph, we have a heart rate line and we have a stroke volume line. So when you get this and you put your picture up there, people will understand this. The red line is heart rate, the blue line is stroke volume, and they follow a trajectory. So when the body demands become higher, what we'll often see is people's heart rate will actually kind of elevate, or it will accelerate quickly. It doesn't mean that the actual number is too high. It just goes from like 120 to 150 really quick. And what it's doing is it's compensating for a weaker stroke volume. So our goal with zone 2 is actually to improve the stroke volume, make the contraction harder so that the heart doesn't have to accelerate as quickly to meet the demands. And I think that this is probably one of the things that this is what causes that inducible threshold, or that mismatch, that inflammation, that it's something that's causing this stroke volume to not go to where it should be and the heart rate to have to compensate. It's easier for your body to say beat faster than it is for it to say beat harder, because the harder has to be trained.
Right. So, okay. So let me see if I got this right. And this is, I think I do. So like at a certain threshold of intensity, the stroke volume of the stroke volume of the heart, meaning how much blood my heart is able to pump, no longer can meet the demand of the activity that I'm doing. So to continue increasing the oxygen that is going to get out, right? We talked about this earlier. My heart's just going to beat faster, which will produce more quantity, more volume of blood getting out of the heart. Am I on the money there?
Yes, right.
Okay. So then this was a question of mine afterwards, and I've explored it a little bit. Like when you guys said zone 2, like I just like instinctively just went to this, and never even was described to me as zone 2, but I just instinctively went to this style of training, which is cardiac capacity, I think aerobic capacity. And I learned it from Joel Jamieson's book, Ultimate MMA Conditioning. And he calls it eccentric ventricular contraction, which is not what you're saying here. But it was my understanding, it was what I thought you were saying, really. And what he's saying is he's trying to increase the amount of blood that the heart can hold, right? So now if it holds more blood, it holds more oxygen. What you're saying is, and correct me if I'm wrong, is aerobic power, right? The amount of blood that gets pumped out. And of course, these two things are going to work together. But when you say zone 2, what are you saying? What are we going for there?
So with zone 2, it's really what we're trying to do is we're trying to improve the small microcirculation. So that's a good question. I've never had to really word this one. Okay, let me think about this.
Well, what is microcirculation?
So it's the small vessels. It's the ones that get undetected when we do like bigger tests, like echocardiograms and stress tests at the doctor's office, right? This is actually the small vessels. This is where that kind of ischemia or inflammation patterns, that's where they start. And then they can become a bigger problem, but we're actually able to kind of improve it, get more of it, get more of the circulation to the heart, which in turn gets more blood, which means a stronger pump.
Yeah. So, I mean, I think I'm with you there. So at the lower heart rates, which is zone 2, right? So like that's, 100 to 120, on a treadmill, roughly, right? That's where I'm at. I'm at 101 to 121. And so at the lower heart rate, the explanation given from my studies was that it's like filling up a water balloon, right? And there's a lot of blood fills that chamber, and it kind of stretches it out. And like anything, prolonged activity in that state is going, like, it just adapts to that, right? So then the chamber it gets bigger if you spend enough time under that particular amount of tension. What I've been curious about since my test at RecoveryPlus is the other side of that, where, and again, this is like what I've just been trained in as a strength and conditioning coach, is the cardiac power side of it, right? So the cardiac power side is the contractile properties of the heart, where if I go and I just empty the tank, max effort sprint for 60 seconds, which for anyone out there considering trying this is world-class suckiness. This is as bad as it gets in terms of conditioning. It's so bad you run out of gas in 10 seconds, #anaerobic threshold. And like, to me, that has always been described to me as cardiac power. Like, I spend my zone 2 time, and I've never described it as zone 2. So this is where I'm trying to figure this whole thing out. I spend my aerobic capacity time improving the size of the ventricle of the heart, allowing me to hold more blood. And then I spend 1 or 2 days a week just trying to pump out as much as I can and training it in that capacity. So, like, in addition to my zone 2, I haven't done it yet, but I'm chomping at the bit to do this crap exercise. Is like, what it is like, I want to train it that way. Talk to me your thoughts through that my thought process.
Okay. Yeah, that's good. That's a good all right. So zone 2. Let's go there first.
Okay.
So I'm gonna try to put this. Okay. So I'm trying to kind of give myself an analogy in my head here that would make this
it's inevitably a challenging topic, no doubt.
It is, but ultimately, right? Like, if we bring more blood into it, right? And okay, a rubber band. Let's take a rubber band. If we were to have it just come out here and we stretch it a little bit more each time, right? So each time we're just making it a little bigger. It would maintain its elasticity. We want it to maintain that elasticity, right? Because eventually, if you bring it out here, its pop back will be just as hard as it was when you first started, right? Because you've slowly done this. Now, if you go out and you get this rubber band and you just start pulling it really hard, and then eventually it's going to be stretched out, when it gets stretched out, it's not going to be able to contract or go back down as much as it did originally, right? Which is what happens when you go out there and all you ever do is as hard and fast of a workout as you can and then stop. It just doesn't, you don't get the same recovery, maybe, is what I'm trying to, with the word I'm looking for is here. So you're missing out on that recovery period. You know, our body can like form vessels like branches, right? So like it can reroute and it can grow and it can improve circulation through light exercise. Like, for example, people who have vascular disease in their legs where they get blockages, with proper exercise, which is walking and calf raises, by the way, it's very simple, basic exercise. We can actually start to see these vessels kind of reroute and supply blood to the muscles even better. Because essentially, what is the heart?
It's a muscle.
It's a muscle, right? So the more that we do, I always call it yoga for the heart, because it's a good, gentle, effective stretch for this muscle to improve circulation. When we improve circulation to muscles, they get bigger and stronger, right?
Yeah.
So when we're doing that for the heart, it's the same concept. Sometimes I think it's just easier to see things if we look at it as a muscle versus an organ.
Right.
Because muscles make sense to almost everybody and organs don't always make sense because they're a little bit more complex. But at the end of the day, it's still what it is.
Yeah, no, I love it. You nailed it. I got to give credit on the spontaneous analogy, right? That was a pretty good one. It's okay. So in terms of like the stuff that you typically see, you see the heart rate dependency. You said one thing before that. What was the other thing?
Let's see. What did I say? Heart rate dependency. We do see high peak VO2s, but we see the heart rate dependency, we see the decrease in stroke volume, and then we see people that think their anaerobic threshold is higher, or they get surprised, right? So like these performance athletes will be like, yeah, wasn't calling you out.
Yeah, look, people, they're not naming names.
People, no, but they'll be like, I'm in really great shape. I feel great. I had this, that, and the other. And I'm like, that's awesome. However, your zone 2 heart rate is 90 to 110. And they're like, what? That's me walking.
What the heck? Why? Like, why was that?
Yeah.
I'm a machine.
So that is how you've trained, right? And you are training effectively. But and this is where we started, right? Which was every single one of us can improve. We can become more optimal. It doesn't mean that what we're doing is wrong, or it doesn't mean that what we're doing is not improving our fitness, but could we do it maybe quicker? Yeah. Could we do it maybe even better? Could we reach higher limits? Absolutely. So it doesn't necessarily mean that like something was wrong or something, you know what I mean? It just means that with this data, all we're doing now is improving what you're, and this is kind of another important point. And we went over this when I went over your test, which is I don't tell you how to change what you're doing, because what you're doing is usually what you like to do. And so all we do is give you guidelines for specific training modalities, right? So if you're going to be rowing or running or cycling or whatever, follow these heart rate zones. And I think that is an important piece. The only thing I probably do is I tell people to have more versatility in their training, because runners run, cyclists cycle, and lifters lift. But we are made from a functional perspective to be able to do all of these things. And our bodies respond better when we do more versatile training methods, right? Like if we do lift, if we do hit, if we do run, if we do cycle, if we do swim, we're going to see probably quicker changes from our cardiorespiratory fitness levels. But yeah, we don't change what people are doing. We just say, hey, by the way, this is how we want you to do what you're already doing.
Right. All right. So zone 2, quick guidelines on that. quick hitters here. We're talking. This has got to be prolonged activity. I think your recommendation was 2 hours a week. Is that? Am I right?
It
Do I
is.
remember that correctly?
Yeah, it's 120 minutes a week, so you can do that kind of any way you want.
But there was,
whether
I think you said, like, I remember the yoga for the heart thing. You kind of were like, yeah, if you want to do more, that's not a big deal.
it's not. Yeah. I mean, if you want to do 7 days a week, 60 minutes a day of zone 2, it's not going to hurt anything. In fact, it's just improving. But the minimum requirement is 120 a week.
Okay. All right. Last thing I just want to hit, and I'll let you go. I know you got to run here in a sec.
Sure.
Is I know we talked about it a little bit, but I want to double down. Like, why is this important? Because, like, why do I care about my VO2 max? Why do I care about my peak VO2? Cardiovascular heart disease, #1 killer in the country. I assume the world. I'm just looking at data from the U.S., but why do I care? Why should I go through the? Why should I, the listener, who already has a Oura Ring and already has an Apple Watch, and I know how good I am. Why should I go to the lab? Why should I get this test? Even if it's just one time, because I think that there's an insane amount of value there. Why do I care?
Yeah, that's a great question. So #1 is knowing your personal numbers is invaluable. It just changes your entire game. Whether you are at the top or not, you're going to get better if you know your personal numbers. And you can't fix what you don't know. Even if it's not broke, right? You can't improve what you don't know. So I think being able to take your personal goals and your personal whatever you're doing to its max potential is important. But I think the #1 thing is, yes, you are correct. Cardiovascular disease continues to be the leading cause of death, and it's a very silent killer. So everybody thinks they're healthy until they're in the hospital with a heart attack.
Yeah, Peter Tia's book, he says that the #1 indication of cardio or heart disease is sudden death.
Yes, that's correct. And I can't tell you how many times I've heard I think I'm in year 12 of being in healthcare, right? But I was fine. I was fine before I had my heart attack. And I'm like, well, you weren't, right? We don't just have a heart attack out of the blue. We typically have something hidden, underlying. And so specifically with CPET testing, right? I would say the tie for the first and second goal is not only to increase exercise capacity, but to detect those early stages of cardiovascular dysfunction and disease. And from this test, we can then say, do we need to get blood work? Do we need to get further imaging? Do we need to get a structural look at your heart? Or do we just want to, everything look great, so now we just want to increase exercise capacity? And again, I'll kind of go back to this, but the smallest of increase, 10%, in your peak VO2, increasing it by 10%, is a 17% decrease in all causes of death and a 23% decrease in specifically cardiovascular death. And I think, like, if anybody is told, hey, I can decrease the risk of you having a cardiovascular event by 23%, would you sign up for that?
I think pretty much everybody would.
Minimum, right? I can decrease it by 23% minimum, because if we follow the data, if we look at the data and we follow the guidelines and the recommendations, 23% minimum is going to be your decrease in cardiovascular death. Seems like a great reason. That's
certainly a great reason to care. I'll tell you what, Jenny, I mean, I have so many questions, and I think we've really nailed down some of the fundamentals here of like what the testing is all about. What is it that we're looking for? Why does it matter? Things to do. What are the common areas? And smartwatches and things like that. And I think, to me, the conclusion, and I'll add a postscript to the end of this episode, but I think the conclusion really comes to me is like the integration of using of seeing the whole system together. One of the things I've always said about the human body is that we have to learn it in isolation, because you got your neurologists and your cardiologists and your podiatrists, and everybody learns it in isolation. But the missing link is bringing it all back together again. And I think that's what's so important about this early detection, simple stuff. Zone 2. Nobody's asking you to ride the Tour de France. We're asking you to like casually walk, like briskly walk up a treadmill, for 120 minutes per week. So, okay, we could go on forever, I'm sure. Jenny, give us if people have questions, if people want to do this stuff, what's their next steps? Where can they find you? Go.
Yeah. So we are on Instagram at RecoveryPlus.health. We're also on LinkedIn, RecoveryPlus.health. You can always look me up, Jenny Martin. You can connect through me. You can find us through our website at RecoveryPlus.health. And our phone number is, I always have to look this up. Isn't that funny?
Fair enough.
I never call us,
You got the inside lines.
I know. Let's see. I don't, here it is. 800-242-6221. And that will get you connected to somebody that can then get you scheduled with us. So, you can find us a lot of ways. Website.
If you want to find them, you can find them.
X now. I got to keep up with my social medias. Thank goodness that there's somebody else out there keeping up with my social media, because
trust me, I got you on that. All right. So I'll put all that stuff in the notes, just to make sure that all that information is easily accessible to anybody listening. Thank you, Jenny, for the time and sharing this information. And I mean, truly awesome. And I mean, like, to me, I'm like, I don't know why more people don't talk about heart disease. Like, why is this the number one thing? Like, it's, so we could go so many different directions, but thank you so much. I'm very grateful for your time, grateful for your expertise, grateful for you sharing and all that stuff, grateful for your work and the stuff that you're doing every single day. This is to me this is the most important stuff. So thank you, Jenny. We'll see you soon.
Yeah, absolutely.